What is up, everybody? Welcome to the Fantasy Flex podcast from the Action Network and Fantasy Labs. I am your host, Chris Raybon, and the NFL draft, it's only a few weeks away now, and we wanted to jump on a podcast with a very special guest, a legend in the industry, absolute beast at betting the NFL draft. He's the head of Roto Grinders, a longtime colleague of ours, I think a former boss of mine over at RG, my guy, Dan Bach. Dan, how's it going?
Raybon, it is great. I've probably done hundreds of broadcasts over the years, maybe even thousands. And I don't know that I've ever done one with you, which is incredible because you've been in this world almost as long as I have. And I don't know if we've ever actually collaborated too much on content. So when I got the invite, it was like, I can't turn this down. I gotta do it. So happy to be here. NFL draft is like my favorite thing to bet. And then of course, right after the NFL draft, then it's like best ball season starts. So like, this is right where I like to be.
Oh yeah. As I told you off air, I'm drafting a best ball team as we record this. Had my little Genty and Bucky Irvin start. So we'll see how that one goes. But I really want to get your thoughts on betting the NFL draft. So we're going to jump into that. And before we get started, we'll have plenty of content leading up to the NFL season here on Fantasy Flex. So be sure to subscribe to the show wherever you listen to your podcasts. And also, don't forget, check out the free award-winning Action Network app and join the Action Network Discord as well. And all of our fantasy football content is available over on fantasylabs.com. But Dan, before we jump into the draft, just so for any of the listeners that might be unfamiliar, I don't know how they would be, but if they are, let's just get to know you a little bit. What's your origin story as far as as betting goes, and just kind of breaking in here to the industry?
Yeah, I mean, I've been betting since college, and that was kind of like my means to get a sweat on sports. And then daily fantasy came around, and I was like, oh my goodness, like this is going to change everything. And I got in early, started a podcast, and reached out to the guys who had just started a site called Roto Grinders. And I was like, hey, I used to do radio and I love this DFS stuff. Let me do a podcast for you. And they're like, sure, sounds good. Why not? And that was before DraftKings even existed. And here we are like 15 years later. And, all the DFS, the major DFS players, DraftKings and FanDuel, are now the leaders in sports betting. And, I've gotten a little bit away from the broadcasting side of things and more into the management side of things. But, I'm still a gambler at heart. I still play DFS and I still sports bet. I moved to Tennessee about 3 years ago, which is, a regulated state, which was huge because I was in Florida before and we had really nothing. So I've definitely gotten more into the weeds on the betting side since I've moved out here to Tennessee. And but it's been an awesome ride, just kind of like seeing how these businesses, including our own, have evolved over the years, and just like the betting landscape just continues to just like evolve. And the NFL draft for me is like one of my favorite things because not that I'm like anti-math, it's just I don't have time for math. And I think betting the draft is like the least math betting that exists out there. And that's why I love it, because a lot of it is just reading research and kind of like knowing players, knowing teams, reading a lot of, from a lot of different sources. And more than anything is these odds are so different across books. That's not like, you're betting a game on Sunday. More than likely the game lines, the totals, the spreads are going to be within a point, a half a point of each other. You can get some wild discrepancies between books. So that's why I love it. And, it's a quick couple of days sweat.
Oh yeah. And, speaking of Tennessee, the Titans have the number one draft pick. And so let's get into the NFL draft. And, you start to kind of get into it, but what, for bettors out there who are used to just betting spreads, totals, their parlays in game and whatnot. How is the NFL draft different, and how do you approach it differently, maybe than some other NFL bets you would make during the season?
Yeah, I think the first thing you have to remember is that the sports books probably don't have much more information than you, right? Because, this isn't some algorithm that's spitting out, who's going to be the first pick. A lot of this is just subjective, and the teams themselves don't know who they're picking when their turn comes up because they don't know who's coming before them. So I think that makes it really, really unique in that, like, from a fair angle, I think we have as much of an edge in betting this as the sports books do. So that makes it, truly, truly unique. But the other cool thing is there's just a number of things that you can bet. You can bet, what team is a player going to go to, what position is a team going to pick in their first round. Who is going to make the first pick in the draft, which this year I think is kind of an interesting bet itself, because there's a lot of controversy around whether it is going to be the Titans who take that first pick. And then once you get a little bit closer to the draft, you get over unders, like will a player be drafted over or under 15. And that's what I really like, is there's just a lot of different ways to go, and even like a lot of like hedge opportunities too, especially if you bet this stuff really, really early. There are really nice hedge opportunities for you. But yeah, it's just, and you can get like plus money on most of this stuff too, which is great. Like, yeah, you're probably not going to bet Cam Ward going number 1 at minus 5,000, but you could say, looking at, bet 365 right now, for their team to draft Travis Hunter. You've got the Giants at plus 320. You got the Titans at plus 450, and you have the Browns at plus 500. And right now the Patriots are plus 150. And I don't feel that confident that the Patriots are going to end up with Travis Hunter there. So you're looking at 3, 4, 5 to 1 in these other spots. And I think that's kind of juicy to be able to get that at this point in time. So that's what I love about the, betting the draft. But my question for you, Raybon, is like, what is going to happen here at the top? Like, I cannot remember a year where we've got the first 3 teams all need a quarterback, and there's only 2 legitimate quarterbacks out there. And, there's a lot of uncertainty here on how this is going to go. So I want to get some of your insight on what you think is going to happen here up top.
Yeah, it's great you brought up that Travis Hunter, prop, because I've been looking at that one too. So I think, and I've been teamed Cam Ward to the Titans. I always thought that was going to be the pick for them. Obviously, they're going to explore every avenue as far as, seeing how much value they can potentially get for that pick. But at the end of the day, they need a quarterback. I mean, Will Levis was like the ultimate meme last year. You cannot go into the season with him. And I don't think you can trade this pick when the consensus is that Cam Ward, is the best quarterback in this draft. And a lot of people do have him, number 1 on their big board. So I think he's going to the Titans. I think where it gets really interesting is, what do the Browns do, and how does that affect the Giants? Because a lot of people have Shedeur Sanders falling. I've even seen some odds. I think it was DraftKings has Jackson Dart more likely to go as the second quarterback than Shedeur. So like a lot of weird stuff is happening there. But I think ultimately the Browns can't pass on a quarterback either. I think they go Shedeur. And then I think the Giants are in this spot where they either go Carter or they go Travis Hunter. They just go best player available. And, we still haven't got, obviously they have the standing offer out to Aaron Rodgers. Does not sound like he wants to go there. But then again, you never know. You never know with Aaron Rodgers, right? Like he might go and you might go turn all the lights off for a couple of weeks, come back, say, hey, you know what? Let's run it back in Jersey just with the blue this time. You just don't know with Aaron Rodgers. So I think the Giants are the team where it's going to get really interesting. But right now, yeah, I'm leaning to them not getting a quarterback in the draft. I think a lot of people have Shedeur. So I think that Travis Hunter at, plus 300 or, and change is an appealing bet. And I think Carter as well. That's an interesting one. I don't think they would do it, but they might just consider him best player available. But I think Hunter to the Giants is kind of how I have it going right now. I just don't think the Browns pass on a QB.
I'm kind of in consensus with you, but I do think there's a little bit better of a chance of even if the Giants can't trade up to number 1, they might trade up just to number 2, give up because I cannot imagine them not walking away without a quarterback. Because do we really think that they're going to go another season here and have like Russell Wilson be their quarterback? Like I just can't fathom that, where I could see the Browns deciding to either go with Kenny Pickett, or maybe they get more draft capital and they can get a Jackson Dart. I just feel like the Browns are a team that they need a quarterback, but I could see them saying, hey, we're not as desperate. And it sounds weird, but I think there's a chance, especially the odds are really leaning towards the Giants walking away with a quarterback. I don't think they're going to like reach for a Jackson Dart at 3 or something like that. That would just be really, crazy. But this uncertainty at the top of the draft really just makes it incredible, because the other team that we haven't even talked about and they're lower down is the Steelers. Like, what are the Steelers going to do, right? Where are they going to get Aaron Rodgers? Like, there's just these holes that need to be filled at some point in time that's going to help us tell this story a little bit. And I don't know if we're going to get it, because we've seen how much of a bounty you can get sometimes when there's not a whole lot of quarterbacks out there. So who knows? I agree the Titans will probably make the pick of Cam Ward, and he's certainly going to go number 1. It's just a matter of whether it's them or the Giants. And if the Giants call the Titans and say, we'll give you our first this year and our first for the next 2 years just to move down to number 3, maybe they call Aaron Rodgers for a year. I don't know. It's fascinating to see, though, but that's an interesting one for sure.
Yeah, you still wonder about a guy like Kirk Cousins. Could he be potentially on the move at some point? Probably. The Falcons are saying no, but you never know. And that's a guy that has connections to the Browns. But I will say, I thought the Giants were gonna all right. They're getting a quarterback no matter what. But the kind of the moves they've telegraphed in the offseason tells me that maybe they are just trying to use a veteran to shore up that position this year, because you don't have a standing offer out to Aaron Rodgers if you're going all in on getting a rookie quarterback reps, because really that's what you want to do, is you're going to want to get the guy reps whoever you draft. So that was kind of interesting to me, and I know they brought in Jameis and whatnot, so maybe we just play musical chairs at the end of the day, but that's where I think the opportunity lies as far as draft betting. And there's even a chance what do you think the odds are that only one quarterback goes in the top 3 picks? Because I think that's going to be some pretty long odds as well. Like, what if that Shador slide is real and you just get like Carter Hunter at 2-3, whoever the two teams are?
Yeah, it could be real. I don't think it is, and I haven't seen any odds for that yet. Because Shador is definitely, I think he's pretty good. I think I might be in the minority here. I think that offensive line was so terrible at Colorado, but when he needed to make some plays with his legs, he could make some plays with his legs. Maybe doesn't have the arm strength of some other quarterbacks out there, but I think he's going to be legit. So I would be surprised. I'd much rather have him than Jackson Dart or somebody like that lower down. So I think he's going to be up top. But the guy we mentioned his name 3 times here is Travis Hunter. Like, this kid, he should probably be the first pick in the draft. He's the best player in this draft. I am fully convinced of it. We've never seen a player who is a top 3 player at 2 positions, and there's a whole lot of unknown on what's going to happen, like when he actually has to suit up and play against grown men 17 weeks in a season. There's no way he's going to play every snap like he did in college. But that sort of weapon that you can sprinkle in one side of the ball, obviously he's going to probably choose one side. He's going to play 80% of his snaps, but he might still play 20 or 25 on the other side. And nobody has done that in the NFL ever that I can remember, at least in recent history. And that's a weapon that I am just so intrigued, because he is by far the best athlete in this draft. And I'm a Jags fan, and we're not going to get him at 5, but if we got to trade up to get him, let's do it, because this guy is like the absolute pinnacle in terms of an athlete, and I think like a game changer, because his floor to me as a and this is crazy because he's a Hall of Famer, but I think his floor as a corner is like Jalen Ramsey. I really do. I think he's awesome.
Yeah, and I'm glad you said that, because I'm looking at the odds right now, and you mentioned there's not many bets you can bet yet. We're still, a month out from the draft, but one of the odds, one of the props that I do see up at DK is, where's Travis Hunter? Which team is Travis Hunter going to be drafted by? And we talked about it. The Patriots are plus 135. If you don't think he's going to get to 5, you can bet the Browns at plus 330, the Giants at plus 380. And essentially, that's your Patriots fade right there. If you think he's going to go top 3, you can bet both of those. And as long as he, goes to 1, you're profiting no matter what. You could put pretty much equal units on both of them, or, you can use our Action Network hedging calculator, however you want to do it. But that's kind of the way I would go, because I agree with you. I think his talent is just too real. We haven't seen a dude like this. I mean, I think there might be an outside shot that the Titans take him. Who knows? He's that good that I wouldn't be surprised. Like, I think they're going to take Cam Ward, but I wouldn't even be surprised if Hunter went number 1.
I'm not a Titans fan, even though I live in Tennessee. But if you could tell me that I could trade down to 3, pick up 2 additional first-round picks, and then get Travis Hunter, sign me up for that all day long. Like, all day long. Because you're getting, I think, a guy who's going to be the cornerstone of your franchise. And let's face it, Tennessee, they're boring. They have nothing going for it. They've got a new stadium coming up in a couple of years. And Cam Ward, believe me, I'm a Miami fan. Cam Ward's a nice player. I think he'll be an okay pro. I don't think he's like a sure thing, like gonna be an all pro or anything like that. If you're asking me like who's the sure thing all pro in this draft, it's Travis Hunter. And if you can trade down and still get him, I wouldn't hate it for Tennessee. I don't know that they'll do it, but I wouldn't hate it.
Yeah, I mean, you got a couple like the Giants. If there's a team that's going to make a boneheaded trade, right. I mean, after seeing what I saw out of and I'm a Giants fan. One of my first articles at this company was, just kind of slaying Mara, because I just think he's awful and meddles into their decision making. And I could see it. I could see it happening. If they strike out, the standing offer with Rodgers and he just retires instead, that's embarrassing. I could see them just going all in and trading up to number 1. I think it would be kind of foolish, but I could absolutely see it happening. But I do want to get your thoughts, Dan, on something that we've kind of been alluding to as we talk about some of these props, which is, so when you're betting the draft, there's a ton of props that you can bet. And it's that's why it's so much fun. And you mentioned it, there's going to be long odds everywhere. However, we're still 5 weeks out and there aren't that many bets out yet. So 2-part question, why do you think that is? And then how should a bettor kind of approach the draft at this point, given that, there's a limited amount of bets and we're limited amount of information because we're still, 5 weeks away?
Yeah, I mean, a lot of this stuff, you're going to get a lot of groupthink as we kind of get closer to the draft. And just so you know, too, like for the listeners, like when the draft is happening, they don't offer that much like in draft. And if they do, it's usually way down the line because of like information leaking out. I remember like back in my college days when I'd bet the draft, it was like the easiest money you could ever make because you'd know the picks before the books could even change it. And but they've wised up a good bit on this, and it's tougher to do like in the moment, the day of. You can bet like what position for teams drafting later on. But for me, like I think a pretty cool thing to bet right now, and this is great because I think it's useful for NFL fans and like even draft fans, is just what position do you think a team is going to take? Because a lot of times, not always, but a lot of times teams will draft need in that first round. And, this is where you get a lot of groupthink in places. And suddenly you get odds very much elevated way above where they should be. And I think a good example of this is with the Indianapolis Colts, where pretty much every mock I've seen has the Colts taking a tight end with that first overall pick. and it's plus 165, which, you're still getting plus money on that. But for a team that's drafting that kind of far down, like right outside the top 10, could go a lot of different ways. I don't think that we're going to see the Penn State tight end Tyler Warren get drafted in front of the Colts at 14, but Mel Kiper's draft just came out, his latest mock draft, and he has Tyler Warren going to the Jets at 7. So that means like there's a whole lot of opportunity there and nice plus money odds on some of these other positions. And I think it's kind of a fun way to tackle it this far out, is just trying to take a position, because then you're not always like locked in on a particular player, and it gives you like a multiple outs potentially on which way a team could go. So that would be one thing to take a look at. And I know DraftKings has those markets open right now.
Yeah, they have it for every team, I believe. Every team. And I totally agree. I wrote an article a few weeks ago kind of talking about my approach, and that's a similar approach that I take, because I think that, not only, like you said, there's all this groupthink, and a guy might not be there when a team is going to draft there, and he might have been like the only option, like you're saying with the Colts and Warren. But even more than that, just one unexpected pick anywhere ahead of that team that you're betting on could change the entire draft. Like we just talked about, like what if Hunter goes, number 2 or number 3, and Carter falls or Shador falls. Like there's so many different possibilities, and there's so many different positions involved early. I mean, you got Ashton Genty, you got a tight end in the top 15, you got a cornerback / wide receiver, a couple of quarterbacks. People are talking about Jackson Dart now. Like there's just so many things that could happen that are unexpected, that I think I find actually that year to year, that type of prop is usually the most profitable prop to bet, because you can, a lot of times it probably won't be the favorite, but it'll be somewhere in that top 3 or top 4. And if you're looking in those for the Colts, I mean, you got offensive line plus 225, safety 5-1, defensive line or edge 5-1. There's a lot of options there, and you're getting great odds on pretty much all of them. So and I mean, could the Colts be a dark horse for a guy like Jackson Dart? Who knows? Who knows where they have, and then a team could trade down. Let's not forget about that. So let's say a team like the Colts trades down out of the first round, and they end up taking a quarterback in the second or something like that. Like you just don't know, and that's how you kind of have to look at it. Like the books are kind of just going by like their, I guess, consensus mock, which. It takes is one thing. So totally agree there. Let's switch gears real quick, and because we did talk a little bit about
before
baseball.
We do. I want to ask about Genty real quick, because I think he is the one guy from a fantasy perspective that, and an NFL draft perspective, which is like really skyrocketing right here. Like I know you, Chris, you're a smart guy. You're like me. You don't draft running backs like in the top 5, 10, first round even. And this is what we're like seeing right now is Genty. They're thinking he could go as early to the Raiders. And like, I think this is a fascinating player because he was so dominant in the college side of things, but I just cannot get this justification to be drafting him, as high. And right now it's the Raiders and the Bears are the top 2 teams at like plus 160 to draft this guy. I mean, what do you think is going to happen with him? Because he, like you mentioned to me, you're doing best ball drafts and you already picked him in the first round. So the guy's going to have an impact in our world, but I'm kind of curious how you think it's going to go with him.
I think so. Here's my take on this. You have to adapt, right? You have to kind of look at how the game is changing. And for so long, I mean, there was this stretch in the NFL, right? Like this 15, 20-year stretch where it was just like Brady Belichick or Brady by himself winning, some Mahomes mixed in, and really nothing else, right? And what you saw last year, I think, is going to raise Genty's draft stock. And I think somebody may even trade up like as crazy and blasphemous as that sound, somebody might trade up to draft him in the top 10, because if you look at what happened last year, the Ravens go and get, a guy who, great player, future Hall of Famer, but, on the older side in Derrick Henry. They are one of the top teams in the league, and their running game just goes completely nuts. The Philadelphia Eagles go and over, kind of give Saquon Barkley all the money he wanted, and they just signed him to an extension too, as well. And they ride him straight to a Super Bowl victory. I know he didn't do much in the Super Bowl, but I think that those kind of guys. Look at the impact Bucky Irving had. Now I think that's kind of a counterpoint, because you could get a guy later, but like, how many guys are guaranteed to be as good as Ashton Jeanty in this draft? Like, there's a lot of good running backs, but Jeanty is like, he has that potential to be a Saquon Barkley-like difference maker. And I do think that teams are going to, look at what the Eagles did, look at what the Ravens did. I mean, even the Bills, $330 million man Josh Allen, they were riding James Cook in the playoffs. Let's not be mistaken, right? So, and he completely changed as a runner too. I think he a lot more physical. It's just, I think the running backs coming back in vogue a little bit. So I do think Jeanty is going to be a top 10 pick. Honestly, where do you see him kind of falling? Do you think teams kind of overthink it, or do you see that kind of trending back? I know the analytics, say what they say, but it's hard. Like, it's only 1 year of data, but it was pretty convincing last year that you can win with the star running back, and he can be kind of like the driver of your offense.
Yeah, and I think the only reason why, if I'm like the Giants and even the Bears to a lesser degree, but they've got Ben Johnson, they spent a ton of offseason free agency money on that offensive line. I think everybody would have said for sure the Bears are going to go line, but they already picked up like 2 or 3 guys already to improve that position. And we know Johnson loves, and we know Johnson will happily, have 2 great running backs. He traded up for Jahmyr Gibbs. Remember, I think
another guy
for that move, right?
Detroit barely loses ever, right?
Yeah. So I don't think he's dropping below Chicago, but I think the question is, if you're the Raiders and you look at your, I mean, I went through their receivers. They are awful. They are so bad. And I think you can get a guy like, Caleb Johnson from Iowa. I think he's a sneaky good back this year that I think you could maybe get in the second round. And it's just a deeper running back draft where I think Chicago's going to be where he ends up, because I just not sold. I mean, they went out and got Mostert in Las Vegas, and not that he's anything. He's probably washed up. But, man, outside of Jacoby Myers, that receiving core for the Raiders is just a total disaster. So I could see them taking McMillan in the draft, especially because he's large. He's 6'4". They don't have a receiver that kind of is that stature. So I think he's going to end up in Chicago, and I think Ben Johnson's going to just do what he does and have a lot of fun offensively and do it with Jeanty. So that's where I think it's going to go.
And I think that's probably the best landing spot for him, because you mentioned it. They got that, like, their offensive line went from kind of shaky to borderline elite if everyone plays up to their ability. I mean, their tackles are always pretty solid, but I mean, you got Tooney on the interior now. You got 3 guys who really are going to transform that line. So you got a first round quarterback. You got a good veteran receiver, a good young receiver. You got a great coordinator, great coach. So I think that would be a spot for him. But I wouldn't be surprised if a team, somebody kind of comes out the blue and just offers Chicago a ton, even to get to number 10 if he's still on the board, and that's if he's still on the board. So I do think he's probably there's going to be some demand for him as well, and I think you got Saquon and Henry and Jahmyr Gibbs even, and all those guys to thank for that. So Jeanty, I'm high on him, and I think he is. I think he's going to be a difference maker if he goes to a contender. The 49ers. I mean, is Christian McCaffrey okay? Do we really like how crazy would that be if he ends up at the Niners at 11, or if they trade up or something? Like, I could see anything happening.
I mean, I would say, I mean, the thing is, Dallas just went and got a bunch of scrubs,
Oh my
Javonte and
God.
Miles Sanders, but it's almost like they're just like sitting there saying he's not going to get to us. But I mean, I don't see San Francisco. I mean, maybe, oh man,
He's the
yeah.
new
I mean,
Trey
I don't
Lance.
see any other. I don't see any other team outside of the Raiders. I mean, unless the Jaguars just wanted Liam Cohen just wanted to go and mix things up and take him at 5, which I wouldn't. I'm a Jags fan. That's not the route I would go. If somebody wants him that early, trade down and let them pick him at 5. But you never know, especially with these offensive-minded coaches. I mean, ATN's been terrible the last couple of years. He does not look like he's a big-time NFL running back. So that's, you get Brian Thomas, Trevor Lawrence, and Ashton Genty as your top 3 offensive playmakers for Jacksonville. That's not bad. If you're an offensive play caller and you're the head coach, like that's a pretty good starting point for them. So now that I talked myself into it, like I don't think that's going to happen, but you never know, especially once these players start getting the momentum. And like you said, you made a great point though, like just the adjustment and how the NFL does change, because Saquon, he did put that team on his back, and I'm sure others took notice.
You can get right now Jacksonville to take a running back with their first pick at 45-1 on DK. So I might have to sprinkle.
Why
yeah.
not? Why not? Talk
Yep.
myself into a sprinkle at 45-1. Sure. See, that's what I love. You can do a sprinkle on that. Know it's probably going to lose, and then who knows? Like if the momentum changes, you can sometimes even hedge back if like the mocks start getting crazy. So I love it. Good idea.
Yeah. Definitely. And I could see him. The thing about it with the guy like that is, I know positional value, but could he be the 5th best player in the draft? Absolutely. So if that's the case, I think he's fair game for pretty much anyone after that top 4. So
it's the top 4. It's 4, and then once you get to that, I think it's wide open because Mason Graham's nice. There's plenty of linemen there that you could go that route as well. But I think once you get past Carter and obviously Travis Hunter, I think it's wide open. So we'll see. We'll have to make some sprinkles.
Speaking of sprinkles, I know you like to draft some best ball teams just like I do. And just wanted to talk to you a little bit about, anyone listening now, probably already a hardcore best baller, but if they're not, any advice, kind of what are your best ball tips for beginners, things that have kind of worked for you in the past, and how do you kind of use RG to have success with your best ball drafts?
Yeah, I mean, best ball for me, I mean, I know we've got a huge season-long audience on this podcast, and I can't recommend it enough to people who play season long. And I know that a lot of season long players were like, I just got my team. That's all I care about. You don't understand. If you haven't done best ball, you legitimately just draft your team and you do nothing else. It is the best format for people who have busy lives, families, kids, jobs. You can't do waivers. You're not telling you to like abandon your season long team, but this is a great way to kind of get some draft reps. And you can do it for cheap. We can do it for $1, $3, and you never know. If things break your way, you could win thousands at the end of the year. But it's just a great addition to season-long players. And I don't know if it's marketed that way enough, because the season-long audience is so huge, and best ball is growing every single year. Don't get me wrong, but it's just a fraction of the number of people who play season-long. And I've been playing with guys, a group of guys who've been doing it. We've been doing it for like 25, 30 years. And I mentioned best ball to them the other day, and they were like, what is that? So I just feel like there's a ton of room for that game to grow. And we're going to be doing a lot of stuff between Roto Grinders and especially on Fantasy Labs, because the job that, you and Sean do is huge on the season long side of things. And we're going to have we're cooking up some really cool stuff. Don't want to spoil it because you can't really say things until they're ready to go. But let's just put it this way. We are going to invest much heavier into the season long and the best ball streets over on Fantasy Labs. And, if you're not a subscriber to Chris and Sean's, season long package, you should do it because it's going to include all the best ball stuff that we have brewing up for you too. So we're just putting it all in one. It's not like a monthly recurring, it's a one-time price. And we'll be talking about that pretty much all summer long. And you know what? I think it's fun. It's just a different way to play fantasy football, but it's one that will not, I promise you, will not take away from that like hardcore season long league that you've been in for 15 or 20 years. So I really recommend people try it out. I know, Underdog and DraftKings are the two biggest players, and they're putting up huge contests at, again, small buy-ins. You don't have to be paying $500 an entry to compete for $100,000 or even $1 million. I think it's like $20 last year for the $1 million. And then they had a ton of different ones for just, $3 that would end up, winning potentially 100K or more. So we're going to invest into it because I'm just really convinced it's the future of fantasy football, because there's just nothing you have to do after you draft your team, which is the best part.
Yeah, and it's really fun to draft too, because even the draft strategy is a little bit different. You're drafting a little bit of a deeper team, but you're also, looking to stack a lot more. I think that's one of the keys that, we found, looking at the data over the last few years, now that we have a more robust data set, is that the people that are winning are stacking. They're planning for the playoff weeks and kind of drafting and stacking and game stacking based on that. So, even if you're a DFS player, I think there's a lot of tie-ins, and it's just a really fun sweat, in my opinion, because like that. It's like you didn't set a lineup, and so it's like there's no stress of like, did I pick the right guy as a guy on my bench? It's like a guy could be on your bench and just rocketing up your team score, and you're just rocketing up the leaderboard, and because your best ball team, obviously, it's your top players each week get chosen automatically. So it's really fun. You're drafting for upside. You're stacking. Like I just drafted a team with Lamar, Zay Flowers, Mark Andrews, and Rashad Bateman, and that was after I got Genty and Bucky Irving. So like that's gonna be a fun team, like no matter what. Yeah. And that's just one of the ways you can go about it. You could draft quarterbacks a lot earlier and not feel bad about it. I mean, there's just so many fun ways. So many fun things you can do with best ball that you don't necessarily get a chance to do because you're probably playing it a little closer to the vest in your season long league.
Exactly. Like nobody is stacking in season long. In fact, it's probably a bad thing to do in most cases, where that is the thing that you want to do most. But the thing is, like, you can still survive and make money if things don't break your way. Like, I drafted Jalen Hurts, but somebody got AJ Brown and Devontae. Well, it's okay. Like you're not dead because your rosters are so big. And, if you look, at the end, every year at the end, there's guys who are drafted very, very late who have huge impacts. Guys like Puka Nacua, he was barely being drafted, but those who did draft him kind of towards the tail end of the summer were really, really rewarded. Same with like Kyron Williams the year before that. So there's a lot of strategy to try and like predict what's going to happen. So that like early, in the sense of like Bucky Irving was a guy I was on very early because I loved his game in college, and I did not think Rachaad White was very good. You put 2 and 2 together, and there's major opportunity there. But it's a very fun way to go, and it's the way you can also build it too. And there's tools out there where you can basically kind of have a portfolio of teams, right? So you might say like, man, drafting 50 teams sounds miserable, but is it? Like if you take the train into work every day, like you're sitting there for 30 minutes anyway on a train, why not just draft a team? Like you can do that. Like it's not a big deal. Or you're doing a workout. Like that was a big thing that Underdog is kind of pushed forward, is their Underdog Cardio Club, where they're like, do a draft while you do 30 minutes or 35 minutes of cardio. It's a great distraction off of like the misery that you're sitting there on that elliptical machine or whatever. So I think it's just a really fun, and like you said, the sweat is great too, because not only do you like follow these in real time throughout the year, when you get down to the playoffs, then you start honing in and knowing like, okay, this is what I have to cheer for. This is what I'm going for with this particular team. So I really hope people give it a try this year who haven't done it, and I think they'll be pleasantly surprised about their experience.
Yeah, and I mean, one of my favorite things to do while doing a draft is to do another draft. Like you could do like 4 or 5 of them at once too, and it like I would say at this point, if you're drafting like a bunch of best ball teams, and when I say a bunch, I just mean a handful. Most people aren't, and you're playing season long. Like your season long draft's gonna be a piece of cake. Like I just cruise through my season long draft. It feels like rookie mode because in best ball you're drafted. Like I was having a draft like Zach Ertz everywhere last year, and like you know what I mean. Like really think about what second or third tight end I'm going to draft with like my 18th round pick or something like that. So it really kind of teaches you where the value is, because I always say in season long, if you're not going to mock draft, like I think just try to like in your head draft upside down just to know where the value is. Like start, let's say, okay, who do I like with my last pick? Not kicker, not defense, but everybody else. Like who do I like there? Is there a running back? Is there whatever? And best ball kind of makes you do that naturally, where you kind of know where the value is into those deeper rounds when it's kind of the cliche, but some people even go in auto draft by that point in a season long draft. So it really sharpens the knife, I think, for season long players. So can't say enough good things.
And you can do it for, like I say, just not a whole lot of investment really too, because they've got these $1 and $2 leagues, which for me, people are still drafting those for real because there's real upside. When you get in some of these mock draft lobbies, everything just kind of turns to auto draft after the first 3 rounds, it seems. 95% of the time. So I think you nailed it. Great prep for those season long drafts.
Yeah, and I'm gonna put you on the spot before we get out of here because we have so much Genty talk. But you mentioned you were on Bucky last year. I know a lot of smart people. Our guy Sean Kerner, of course, was on Bucky as well. So I got to ask you, like, who's your guy this year after Genty? Like out of that all, because there's supposed to be a really good draft, right? Like who else you got your eye on that you think could kind of pay off dividends in those, maybe in the middle rounds or just outside of that first running back pick?
Yeah, it's really hard to predict without knowing where they're going to go, because we see it year after year. Like it's all about like opportunity. Most of these guys, especially at running back, they're pretty good. They get an opportunity. They can make things happen. And so like that's a big part of it. But I mentioned him a little bit earlier. I think the running back from Iowa, Caleb Johnson, is somebody who I was really impressed with. Him running the football, looked like an NFL running back. So he's a guy that I've got my eye on. We mentioned him earlier, Tyler Warren with Penn State. Like we saw last year, Brock Bowers was put together one of the best seasons ever for a tight end. And if anybody watched that guy play in college at Georgia, that should not have been a surprise. He was just a dominant force. And I think you could make a case that Tyler Warren was in that stratosphere. Now, he's also a guy who does a lot more like running the ball. And I think he's interesting because what we started to see a little bit last year, Chris, was some of these quarterbacks just did not want to do the quarterback sneak, to do the Philly, what do they call it again? The tush push, yeah. They just weren't comfortable. They just weren't good with it. So what we saw what happened, and even a team like Baltimore did this, where you saw Mark Andrews come, and then he'd be the one taking the tush push. I can almost assure you that is going to happen with Tyler Warren this year, because he did it at Penn State an absolute ton. And you might say to yourself, why would you draft a guy over that? Well, guess what? That could equate to like 3 or 4 touchdowns if things break right, just on that play alone, before all the other things. So he's going in the top 10 for a reason, and I think he is going to be a very, very interesting player. From a wide receiver position, I don't love this year's class. I actually think Emeka Egbuka from Ohio State is really, really good because he's played in the shadow of guys who are all pros. Even this past year, it's like, oh, I'm a senior, I'm the guy. And then Jeremiah Smith, who's an absolute freak, shows up on campus, probably, the favorite to win the Heisman next year. And so Egbuka was like over, overlooked again this year, but this guy is I think he's better than Smith and Jigba was coming out, and I think he's just getting overlooked a little bit just because of he's always been second fiddle. But look for him to be kind of a sneaky wide receiver that I think can, in the right opportunity, give you some good stats, because I think he can play in the slot, he can play outside. He's not like one dimensional. Or a guy like Tet McMillan, he's probably going to start wherever he ends up. Big body, put up some big numbers, probably going to be okay. But I don't think he's going to be under the radar for many teams out there. But you know what? Once we know where everybody's playing, you can bring me back and I'll give you some even better picks, because that definitely matters in the calculus.
Oh yeah, absolutely. Especially for the running backs, it's going to matter where they're going to go. A couple of guys that stand out to me, I think Samson from Tennessee, he really pops. And then Scatterbo, obviously. I think, he just, when you watch him play, you're like, oh, this guy's going to be a good football player. And a guy like that at receiver for me, I could just see like a team like the Rams drafting this guy in like the middle rounds. Besh out of TCU. Like he just looks like a football player to me. His measurables don't pop, but the route running, after the catch, everything. So I wouldn't be surprised. I think this is going to be a deep skill draft for running back, for wide receiver. Of course, you got the two tight ends. So this is going to be an interesting one from a best ball perspective. That's another thing in best ball we probably should have mentioned. You could take a lot of rookies, and that's one. Usually, you're going to get rewarded for it. So right now, like a lot of rookies are probably going a lot higher than you would even think that they should. But I think that we're going to see a lot of production out of this rookie class in year one. That just seems how it's going. You can't really afford to not in this day and age in the NFL, the way these quarterback contracts are.
And Underdog, they actually run these sophomore and the rookie and sophomore leagues too, where you're only drafting guys who are first and second year players. So that's the kind of gimmicky stuff that you can get into a little bit with best ball as well. That is kind of unique to that game in particular. So if you really like projecting rookies, you can kind of play games where you're only drafting rookies, which is kind of fun.
Oh yeah, and I think that's a good place to wrap it. This was a pleasure, Dan. Thanks for hopping on. Just a reminder for everybody out there: check out Roto Grinders for everything best ball. It's really fun, and Roto Grinders just so many extremely useful and sharp tools that you can use to crush your leagues. Also, be sure to check out Fantasy Labs for more of our fantasy football content. You'll get me, you'll get Sean Kerner as well in there. So Roto Grinders, Fantasy Labs, check them both out. And of course, check Dan out. You can find him on Twitter, formerly X. Oh, wait, no. X, formerly Twitter, that is, at Dan_BACK. And I'm at Chris Raybon, RAYBON. Until next time, let's get this shmoney.